Welcome to Confessions of a Parent Coach. I'm Coach, a mother of four, and potty talker, Ann Kaplan. This is the podcast where I confess something from my own parenting and coaching life, teach a lesson around it, and answer your questions. Even we parenting experts are far from perfect, and the real magic happens when we get down with all that imperfection. We get into the gritty side of parenting here, so earbud up and dive in.
Hello, listeners. I am excited to be here with you again for another episode of the podcast, talking about disrespect today. I have heard from so many of you recently talking about your kids being disrespectful and rude. And so it really stirred up a bunch of stuff that it was almost like a memory from the past for me because I remember very well how frustrating and defensive I would feel when my kids were super disrespectful to me. And let me tell you, the reason why I'm talking about this in the past tense is not because my children are now super respectful of me all the time. My kids still disrespect me, but those feelings of defensiveness and anger don't stir in me very often anymore. And I'm going to talk to you today about exactly why that is and why that's really, really important. So, I think one of the dilemmas that I find myself in a ton as a coach is when you're working with a coach, you want answers to exactly how do I fix this situation? How do I get the results that I want? What should I do? And a lot of times the answers to those questions can be dissatisfying to a parent. When you come to me and say, how do I get my kid to eat broccoli? And I say, well, let's talk about why you want to get your kid to eat broccoli. And is it actually important for your kid to eat broccoli? And do you even have the right to make your kid eat broccoli? Man, that is so annoying. You just want, understandably so. And I have a coach and I feel the same way. I just want you to tell me, do this, 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 and this. And then you're going to get your kid to eat broccoli. And unfortunately, that isn't going to lead to good parenting at all. All it is going to lead to is me teaching people how to be extra coercive and like even more like ineffective in their parenting. So a lot of times we have to unpack this stuff and it is super frustrating. And that is exactly what happens with the whole disrespect thing. So we are going to talk today about exactly why is actually the first step in the how to around disrespect is actually about managing your feelings around disrespect. It's actually kind of getting to that place like I described where I am right now, where even when my kids are disrespectful, I don't have that anger and defensiveness that was driving my parenting before. And then we're going to talk about, okay, and when my kid's disrespectful, there is something I need to do about it. So what do I do? We're going to talk about that too. So confessions of a parent coach. Are you ready for your confession today? That is my confession. My kids are super disrespectful of me sometimes, or I would actually even walk that back further and say my kids behave in ways that are typically considered extremely disrespectful sometimes. I'm going to give you examples: slamming doors, walking away from me when I'm talking to them, rolling their eyes when I'm giving them advice, not listening to anything that I have to say in terms of advice or suggestions or wisdom anytime I tell them anything. Nope, nope, nope. Okay. And all of that stuff can be super irritating. Don't get me wrong. But why would you want to be taking advice from a parent coach whose kids slam the door in her face and walk away from her when she's talking and swear at her and all of those things? Hopefully, by the end of today's episode, you are going to see why that's not a problem. And it also doesn't mean that my kids are being disrespectful. So let's dive into this whole situation because I hope that I've at least piqued your interest, but I'm also saying some things that you're like, I don't know about this. So when someone tells me that they feel disrespected, so oftentimes in a session with a client, when they're telling me my kids are behaving super disrespectful, they're being rude, what do I do about disrespectful behavior? What do I do about rudeness? I ask them to give me an example, and it could easily be one of these that I just that I just gave you, like, oh, how about I was talking to my kid on the phone and they hung up on me. Or right in the middle of me talking to them, they just rolled their eyes, turned around and walked away. Oh, so frustrating, right? And I'll say, okay, how did you feel in that situation? I felt disrespected. So I want to ask you a couple of head scratcher questions that are hopefully going to help us with the actual emotional response that we have when we feel that our kids are being disrespectful. First question: what is the difference between being disrespected and feeling disrespected? So, is it possible for someone to disrespect you, but that you don't actually feel disrespected? And I talked about this a little bit in that whole judgment podcast. Like, someone could be judging you, but you get to decide if you feel judged. So, is it possible for someone to truly disrespect you, but for you not to actually feel disrespected? Or is it possible for someone to actually respect you very much, but for you to feel disrespected by them anyway? And I would posit that in a lot of families, that is what's happening. Your child might be misbehaving or treating you poorly, and we assume that that means that they don't respect us. But what's usually true is that kids respect their parents a ton. There's a lot of other stuff going on that's leading them to behave disrespectfully, but it's not actually that they disrespect us. So think about these questions. Could someone respect you, but for you to feel disrespected by them? Is it possible for someone to disrespect you, but for you not to feel disrespected? Because what I'm getting at here is that your child's behavior may be disrespectful, but you get to decide whether you are truly disrespected. You get to decide whether to discipline around their behavior or around your feelings around their behavior. Do you see what I mean by that? You get to decide whether their behavior is drastic and really upsetting, or whether their behavior is simply an unfortunate choice that requires a parental response. And now I think you can see why unpacking our emotions around disrespect is job number one. Because the first piece of advice in that quote unquote how to that I'm going to give you is we need to be treating disrespectful behavior as a simple poor choice on our child's part, the same as going outside without a coat or not doing their homework or blah, 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 blah. Because when we can look at their misbehavior as just simply a misbehavior that requires a parental response, not this really drastic, upsetting thing, we're able to parent so much better. So, okay, that's really easy to say, but when someone slams a door in your face or hangs up the phone on you, what do you actually do? How do you take care of yourself in a way that actually leads you to not be feeling disrespected? So I want to even go further with this whole disrespect versus disrespected and blah, 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 blah. So here's another head scratcher question for you. Consider the distinction between disrespected the verb and disrespected the feeling. Because there are so many verbs that do double duty as emotions in our language. And by the way, for all you brainiacs out there, those are called participles. But think about all of these verbs that we use as emotions. We use them as adjectives, right? Judged, deceived, manipulated, disrespected. I'll tell you a little story. Back in the day when we were dealing with our eldest son's descent into madness, that he decided to go on this little walkabout in his freshman year, I was working with a therapist who was kind of helping in the family department. And, she asked me, how do you feel when your son lies to you? And I said, I feel deceived. I feel manipulated. I feel duped. And she said, what if those weren't actually feelings? What if those were stories? What if I make a rule, just for the sake of our conversation, that anything that's a verb, we're not allowed to use as an emotion? Think about what that means. Think about how many times you use those participle adjectives to describe how you feel or to name how you feel. I feel deceived. That's how that was my number one word that I used to describe how I felt when Elijah would lie to me. I feel deceived. And when she said, like, you're not allowed to use that, you're not allowed to use any ED words. I was like, I literally was like stuck. I could not think of any words that weren't describing what had happened to me. It took me a really long time to say, I feel okay. What if I can't say deceived? What's the feeling behind that? How do you feel when someone deceives you? Okay, it was literally like, I mean, it takes a lot to leave me speechless, people. But I was silent for a while thinking, and finally I came up with, I feel mistrustful. I feel wary. I feel guarded. Let's see, there you go. Even there is a little verb. It's very tricky. Okay. So I'm not going to put that rule on you, but I do want to plant that seed to be a little bit like kind of like suspicious when you use one of those participle words to describe how you feel. Like, what would you say if you weren't allowed to use one of those words? What would be another emotion you would feel? Because let's keep going with this a little bit more. Um, those like double duty words, judge, deceive, manipulated, disrespected is one of them, of course. It really plays tricks on us. And there's two kind of different ways that happens. First, these kinds of ways of describing how we feel make it super easy for us to hang out in a really passive place in our lives. Because what we're really saying when we say, I feel disrespected, is something's being done to me. Someone is disrespecting me. That happened to me. Someone disrespected me. It's not only the thing that's happening. Now, the thing that's happening is also our emotion and it's our very state of being. And it all came about by something being done to us. But that's really problematic because we know, and if you work with a coach, if you work with me, one of the things that is going to be tricky, a coach's job, one of our jobs is to kind of hold your feet to the fire and hold you accountable. A lot of times when people hire me, I say, well, why do you think I'm the thing that's going to make the difference? You've tried all these other things before. What's different about hiring me? Why me? And one of the things I get almost every time I ask that question is, I really need accountability. I need someone that I'm going to come and talk to 2 weeks from now, and they're going to say, how did it go with that thing that we decided you were going to do? Or, okay, so you kind of mishandled that situation. What was going on there? What would make it easier for you? That accountability. Well, people don't realize when they say it's kind of like, be careful what you wish for, because part of accountability is me saying, okay, well, what if this is a you problem instead of a your kid problem? What if you are 100% responsible for changing this situation? All of those that's taking that accountability piece to a whole nother level. We're not just talking about checking in with somebody and having someone's eyes on you. We're talking about somebody helping you pick up the mantle of your life and own it. And when we use those ed verb adjectives, when we use those words to describe what's going on with us, it really feeds into our natural. All of us have the natural um, proclivity to feel like the universe or the world around us is making us blah, 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 making us angry, making us, lose our temper, making us late. We don't take ownership. And that's normal. That's our natural ego state, is to just feel like, that's not my fault, basically. And when we describe our feelings, when we identify our feelings with that kind of language, we're feeding into that in a huge way. So, really challenging, really problematic to hang out in that passive role. One of the things that we do as coaches is help you step into an active role in your life. And that is one reason why, even though grammatically it is totally correct to use those words, I often will say, okay, what if you're not allowed to use those words? And I do to you what was done to me. And you kind of look at me like a deer in headlights for a second before you have to like kind of pull on some deeper recesses to actually kind of truly get at, in an accountable way, what is going on with you internally. Because the other thing is that when we are in that passive role, we feel so powerless. Like, of course we do. So, no wonder disrespectful behavior on our children's part leads us to being defensive and angry. For a lot of people, we're trying to fight back against this thing that's being done to us. We're feeling like we're backed into a court. How dare you talk to me that way? And whoa, now we're off to the races, right? So that's one of the reasons why this whole like saying I feel disrespected or telling ourselves that we feel disrespected is can be a little bit tricky. So I want you to be on to yourself. Notice how many times in the day, well, first of all, how many times in the day do you actually identify and name your feelings at all? That's a whole topic for another podcast. But when you do, how often are you using those kind of verby words to describe not necessarily actually your emotion, but what has happened to you or what you believe has happened to you that's leading you to feel an emotion? Because here's the second reason why this kind of language is so challenging or tricky. Our brains already love to confuse thoughts and feelings with each other. And I would argue this is exactly why these words exist in our language the way that they do. Language is such a great reflection of a cultural sort of zeitgeist. Our brains totally confuse thoughts and emotions with each other all the time. Think about this. Think about how often you say things like, I feel like blah, blah, blah. And this is another one I get when I ask people, like, well, how did you feel when that happened with your kid? Well, I felt like they never listen to me. I felt like they don't even care what I have to say. I felt like you don't respect me. I feel like you never listen. I feel like you expect me to do everything for you. I feel like blah, 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 blah. And then we tell a sentence. It's not really an emotion. And disrespect is the perfect one. Feeling disrespected is basically the same as saying, I feel like you don't respect me. But you don't respect me is not a feeling. You're not going to find that on any feelings wheel. That's not an actual emotion. It's a sentence, it's a story. What we're really saying is, I think you don't respect me. When we say, I feel like you don't respect me, what we're actually saying is, I believe, or I think, or I'm telling myself that you don't respect me. So here's why the whole disrespected adjective becomes really problematic, because as soon as we allow ourselves to, well, first of all, conflate our thoughts with our emotions, the stuff that's happening outside of us with our emotions, putting ourselves in this passive role, how on earth are we going to be able to respond to disrespectful behavior with any sort of calm, present, compassionate attunement or connection to our child? For goodness sakes, I am so wrapped up in a horribly painful story as soon as I fall into this trap. You don't respect me. I'm powerless. Nobody is listening to me. You don't care what I have to say. Oh my goodness. How on earth? Even that sentence, how dare you talk to me that way? Right? How can we possibly expect ourselves to parent well from that vantage point? It's just, we're setting ourselves a Herculean task. And I think there's some grace and compassion that we need for ourselves to say, well, no wonder we're having such a hard time responding effectively to disrespectful behavior. We're in so much pain when we feel disrespected. So that is why I say, like, the first thing for you to do is kind of suss that out. Identify the difference between your feelings and your thoughts. Be able to actually name your thoughts. Hold yourself accountable. Hold your own feet to the fire and say, okay, if I'm not allowed to use those ED words to describe how I feel, what do I actually feel? And for me, and for a lot of my clients, it's not the same for everybody, but I think a lot of the feelings are, well, first of all, anger and defensiveness. I know that's true for me. Also, I think there's some feelings in there, and then I'm first going to describe the thought to help you arrive at the feeling. There's some feelings in there about, my child shouldn't be behaving this way. I must not be parenting them well. Something must be going on that's leading them to think that it's okay to act this way, or it's okay to think this way about me. And what feelings are behind all of those stories? Remember, I did not describe any feelings just now. I only described stories. I described thoughts. What are the feelings behind there? Well, for me, one of those feelings is probably like failure, maybe incompetence, shame. Shame is a huge one for so many parents. I feel shameful that maybe I have dropped the ball and not taught my child better behavior, right? This is all going on inside of us. And I would also posit, and we're going to get to this in a little while as I keep talking here. There's also some feelings of just how it feels inside of us when our kids don't have positive emotions about us. And maybe we don't even know if they actually do have negative emotions around us or not. But whether or not they do, our belief that they have negative emotions about us is very painful. What are the emotions that come from believing our children have negative emotions around us? Well, for a lot of us, tolerating other people's negative emotions, especially the negative emotions of people we love, is very hard. It's so painful. So, this is part of that kind of like introductory work to being able to handle disrespect better. Because learning to identify our feelings and being able to separate our thoughts from our feelings is so important. And that's why it's a huge part of my job with clients. That's why we have that frustrating thing of like, well, let's like examine this more. And while you're being like, no, can you please give me the recipe book to stopping my child from being disrespectful? And the answer is yes. And this is part of that recipe book. This is number one. This is preheating the oven. Okay. In that recipe book, managing your feelings, being able to separate your thoughts from your emotions. This is preheating the oven. This is step one. When we think something, that thought creates an emotion, and that emotion drives our behavior. You don't respect me is a really painful thought. So, of course, we feel angry and defensive and invisible when we think that way. And that leads to that whole domino effect that does not end with awesome parenting. It ends to that, oh, no, you didn't kind of reaction, doesn't it? So, if we can manage those thoughts and feelings, they are going to lead, those healthier thoughts and emotions are going to lead to way better parenting when our kids are behaving disrespectfully. Because once we're able to do that, once we're able to separate the thought from the emotion, the story from the emotion, we get to decide how that domino effect goes down instead of it just like cascading into a big mess. So for me, and this is what I said, this is why it's not a problem for me. This is why it's a memory, it's a feeling from the past, remembering how I used to feel when my kids behaved disrespectfully. Because for me, the thought I feel disrespected was I was able to turn that and examine that and turn it into instead, not I feel disrespected, but I'm telling myself that you don't respect me. So I feel angry and defensive, right? The feeling and the story become separate, and then I can start to work on that. I can change it. And that's what I exactly have done. And that's exactly what I help my clients do. So now when my kids behave disrespectfully, which they definitely do, I tell myself, this kid is going through something intense. That's why they're behaving poorly. And the emotion I feel about that is completely different. I don't feel angry that they're going through something intense. I feel sorry for them. I feel curious. I feel compassionate. Let's figure this out. And I'm so sorry that this is happening to you. When my kid slams the door in my face, I don't like it. It's definitely something I need to do something about. And we're going to talk about that in a second. But in the moment, what I usually feel, and I do not want anyone to walk away from this podcast thinking I never have negative emotions or get pissed off at my kids. I totally do. But most of the time, my kid hangs up on me or slams the door in my face. I think that sucks. And that's kind of all I think. That sucks. It sucks for them because now they're going to get a consequence that they don't like. It sucks for them because obviously they're not doing very well or they wouldn't have behaved that way. And that's about it. That's the whole thing. Oh my gosh, if you thought that way when your kid was disrespectful to you, imagine how you would respond. It would be like night and day, wouldn't it? And that's exactly what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about, okay, what is the night and day response now that we have preheated the oven? What's the rest of this recipe book? Right? So, this is why being able to really look at it from this place of like, well, that sucks. This is why my kids are able to behave in these quote unquote disrespectful ways and for it not to be a problem. Because really, once I was able to do this work, and once my clients happens, I see it all the time with my clients too. Once we are doing this work and preheating the oven, once we do this like step one, all of a sudden we realize so much stuff about these disrespectful situations. I think one of the biggest things we realize is that telling ourselves our kids don't respect us when they act disrespectfully is, well, first of all, it's kind of selfish. What? That's so weird to say that, but it kind of is selfish because it's making their intense emotions and reactions about us. That's what I realized for myself. I was making their behavior about me. I was making it all about me when really people's behaviors, people's emotions, all of that stuff is entirely about them. And that's true for our children. When my daughter slams her door in my face, it's because she's extremely upset. When my son walks away from me when I'm talking to him, it's because he's flooded and he needs space. When one of my teenagers doesn't take my advice, it's not about that. It's not about disrespect. It's about them finding their own way and honoring like this hugely deep calling that all teenagers have to be independent and try stuff on their own. It's really, really, really not about me. Kids make poor decisions because they're still learning how to respond to hard things with maturity, not because of anything about us. So, in a really weird way, telling myself, oh, my kids don't respect me, that's the story about this situation. It's kind of selfish. It's a little navel gazing. Also, I kind of started realizing, and this gets back to that negative emotions, like tolerating our kids' negative emotions about us. If my kid disrespects me, that's kind of none of my business. Like, there's no rule that says my kids have to respect me. There's no set of prescribed feelings that they have to feel about me. They're to not respect me. I don't want that. It hurt. It sucks. And that's my work, right? But it is their choice to decide if they respect me or not. And they might not respect me in every moment of their life. And that's okay. If I can't handle my kids having negative emotions about me, that's a me problem. And I can totally work on it. And I do. And I have. And I help my clients do that all the time. Like, widening that window of tolerance so that we can tolerate our kids' negative emotions, especially their negative emotions about us, huge, huge. Okay. So then I don't have to worry about making them respect me. It's not a problem for them not to respect me. And instead, I can focus on my ability to tolerate their emotions, their unflattering opinions. I can focus on taking care of myself when someone mistreats me. And I can focus on living in a way that I respect. You see where I'm going with this? So, the other thing that comes from doing this work, from preheating the oven, so to speak, is this other realization that I see my clients have all the time. And this gets back to the just the utility, the whole like, how do we do this? What do we do differently? I see my clients all the time when they do this work, when they do that whole preheating the oven stuff. I see them realize how unhelpful this story is. Telling ourselves our kids don't respect us is super unhelpful because when we feel disrespected, we are not calm or rational. In fact, we usually behave in ways that don't deserve respect at all. When we're angry and defensive, when we feel invisible, when we feel maybe shameful about our children's behavior, we are not parenting well. That's a terrible place to parent from because we're not attuning to our children. We're not setting boundaries with them healthily, and we are not regulated. And those are the number one, I should say the top three, the most important things of good parenting. You hear me say this all the time. Authoritative parenting has two hallmarks: attunement with the child, connection, right? Being in a connected relationship with your child, and boundaries and leadership. And in order to do both of those things well, we need to be regulated. Well, guess what? Telling ourselves that kids don't respect us leads to all three of those things being off kilter. And so we're not actually parenting well. We're not helping them learn how to handle tough situations better next time. Like, oh, okay, instead of slamming the door in my face, what's another way we could handle this? Well, if I'm responding like a super dysregulated angry person, I'm certainly not giving them any model of what to do differently when you feel upset, right? So, but above everything else, telling ourselves that this story that our kids don't respect us is it's just not effective. It doesn't work, basically. So let's talk about this. What do we do differently? We've preheated the oven, so to speak. Once we tell ourselves a different story, we can start to respond to them with more sympathy and also non-attachment because it's not about us. So we're like calm and patient when they behave this way. You get to stay a safe space for them to come back to. You get to ask really great questions, not in the moment when everything is calm, great, curious questions that help our kids understand themselves and teach us about them. Like we might not even really realize why they're acting the way they are. And especially if you have a teenager, I guarantee half the time we don't realize why they're acting the way they are. So then we can really address what's going on, the real stuff that's going on, instead of making a federal case about the symptom of what's going on, right? That disrespectful behavior is a symptom of what's going on. And when we try to sort of force our kids to behave more respectfully by being really mad about them behaving disrespectfully, we're not really getting to what's really going on. We're only treating the symptom. And so we can actually parent so much better. So let's be clear. When kids do have poor behavior, your kid can be behaving respectfully. Your kid might not even respect you. That's totally possible. You get to decide if you're going to feel disrespected. And so when you decide, you know what, that's not the emotion I'm going to use to drive my parenting right now, we still respond to that poor behavior. When someone yells at us, when someone behaves thoughtlessly or selfishly, we get to decide what kind of treatment we will tolerate and how to take care of ourselves when someone behaves in ways we don't care for. That's what that whole control and boundaries and leadership part of authoritative parenting is. But it doesn't have to be this like, I will make you mind kind of attitude. We use healthy boundaries and healthy enforcement to respond to disrespectful behavior healthily. And that could be something as simple as saying, I can see you're really upset and I'm happy to talk about it when you can lower your voice. And then we walk away. It could be something as simple as saying, we don't slam doors in this house. And it's really unfortunate that that's how you've been using, your door to manage your emotions when you're really upset. So literally, this is an old school love and logic thing. It looks like you really can't handle having a door right now. That's fine. I'll be putting your door in the garage until we're ready to not, harm the house or damage the house. That is obviously not the most common thing, but I will tell you, of my 4 children, of my 19 years parenting, I have had to remove a door once, and it was a very effective consequence. We had about a couple of weeks where we didn't have a door for a while. And that is another thing that has changed things over time. So I told you my confession in the beginning of this episode was, my kids do get angry with me. They do behave disrespectfully to me at times. They do slam their doors sometimes. They do hang up the phone on me sometimes. They do roll their eyes when I'm talking to them. That does happen. It happens a lot less frequently than it does in other families, and it happens a lot less frequently than it did when I was a younger, less seasoned parent. And it's because when a kid gets a boundary, a calm, rational, patient, loving, compassionate boundary for the behavior that they're having, what that allows them to do is explore and discover new ways to manage their emotions. So instead of slamming their door, most of the time my kids say, I need space from you right now, instead of walking away while I'm talking to them. Most of the time my kids just go to their room and shut the door instead of slamming it if they need space. You can see how giving these consequences in very grounded, compassionate, calm, rational ways helps kids learn instead of forces them to be afraid of us and behave differently next time. That's it's a huge distinction. So being able to look at this, remember when you stop telling yourself the story, I feel disrespected, my child isn't respecting me. When we stop telling ourselves that story, remember way back in the beginning of this, I was talking about putting yourself in an active, powerful role in your life. Listen to what I'm saying when I say, when our kids behave disrespectfully, we get to decide what kind of treatment we tolerate, how we take care of ourselves. Listen to that. That is so much more of a powerful place to be than we get to make our kids respect us and how do we force them to treat us differently, et cetera, et cetera. You can't do that. You can't force anyone to treat you differently, but you absolutely can decide what behavior you tolerate, how you take care of yourself when someone doesn't treat you well, the boundaries you set, and how you enforce them healthily. And it all starts from that preheating the oven thing, that whole step one. It starts from regulating your emotions so that you're not behaving from this place of feeling disrespected and powerless and defensive. If you can do that first step, all of the other stuff falls into place. And obviously, when you're working with me, we get really into the nitty gritty of like, okay, what is your boundary? How will you enforce it? What is the consequence? When do you have those connected conversations? And when you do, when you ask those curious questions that help your kid open up and figure out their stuff so that they can handle their situation differently next time, what questions do you actually say? How do you ask those questions? All of those things are part and parcel of this. And they're not accessible to us at all when we're telling ourselves the story of disrespect. So I want you to kind of walk around for the rest of your day today thinking about how often are you telling yourself a story when you think you're actually experiencing an emotion? What if disrespect is a story? How would you parent differently if you didn't have the emotions that come from all those stories you're telling yourself? And are you ready? Are you ready, listener, to actually learn how to tell yourself new stories? How are you going to retrain your brain to respond to these situations differently and experience your child's misbehavior and disrespectful behavior through the lens of this is a behavior that requires a connected parental response, not this is urgent and horrible and really painful, right? Are you ready to make that switch? And if the answer to that question is yes, you and I need to be talking. I want to hear from you. I don't want you to only be hearing from me. Set up that free discovery call that's in this podcast description. It's in the email that you got. If you got an email about this, it's in the video description. If you're watching this on YouTube, click that link and set up your discovery call with me. It is a free hour for us to sit down, for you to tell me your story and share what's going on with you, for me to help you start to feel shifts even in that call. I can't tell you how many people after hiring me come back and say, I felt like something different. I started making changes the second I got off that free call with you. Happens all the time. I would actually say that that's the norm. So, what are you waiting for? Set up that free call, share your story, get my feedback, start to make some shifts, and figure out, if I'm the person you want to work with to make a huge change in your family. Feel that new connection, be able to stay connected and feel love for your child while they disrespectfully treat you. It is a really huge game changer to know that things don't have to be perfect in our families for us to feel good and connected and loved and in this really, really close environment with our families. That feeling can be pervasive even while we go through hard stuff, even though while we shepherd our kids through hard stuff, even while we ourselves are going through the hard work of leveling up our parenting. I hope this is helpful for you. I can't wait to talk to you again next week, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.
The episode is over, but there's more waiting for you. You can grab my free workbook, Getting Kids to Listen the First Time, that walks you through the fundamental principles I teach all of my clients and applies them to this very universal parenting challenge. So if you're sick of repeating yourself all day long or just want to learn more about my style, you'll definitely want to go to bit.ly/kidswholisten. And if you're ready to work with me, let's meet. Set up a free call at bit.ly/Kaplan call, and let's create an action plan that gets you exactly where you want to go. And of course, links to all this goodness are in the show notes. Thanks for joining, and I'll see you next time.